is okay with this call being recorded, blah, 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 as per usual. I mean, we only have regulars, I think, so it's recording now.
Okay. Hello, welcome everyone to the Metrictank community call. Thank you for joining. We're just going to get right into it today. We do have one announcement, which is the governance updates that were recently merged in, I believe, yesterday or today. There's not really much of a difference. Some of the wording is a little bit clearer. We have a workflow that shows, I don't know, diagrams and things out better, but not really a big thing there. So let's go into discussions.
For what it's worth, I actually thought the new governance was a little bit confusing. Like there's like maintainers versus developers or something. I'm not sure if it's the same group or if it's different people. I found it a little bit confusing. But
anyway. Okay. Anyone else, or is everyone else okay? Does anyone need a more detailed breakdown or explanation of it? So to be fair, in the initial governance, I've removed all of that because I thought it was confusing as well. I simplified it. However, we're dealing really with one project, right? So some of the places where we copied a lot of this from have many projects, many repos under one name in GitHub. So ours is a slightly simpler case. However, if we wanted to add projects, it would be easy now.
I see that we have developers, we have team members, we have maintainers, and I'm not sure what the difference is between these three groups.
So team members are and anyone correct me if I'm wrong, team members are the people who get voting rights. Not all developers are team members, and not all maintainers are team members, but they should be, theoretically. Most of the time they are. So developers are anyone, I believe, who has push or commit rights to a repo, and then the maintainer is typically the approving authority. They're the person responsible for making sure that the incoming changes don't mess anything up.
The maintainer is basically more equal than others. They should get more say in an equal form of people. And also they have specified and written down areas of expertise as per maintainers MD as of today.
Okay, so and by the way, on that note, I whipped the maintainers.md up pretty quickly. I think it's kind of, I mean, it's a good starting point, but I'm sure it can be improved. Like, for example, I didn't mention Thorium on there yet because I'm not sure which category you would feel most comfortable with being listed at. But
and I think this is actually one of the files where as long as the people who are basically on team agree and have a consensus on, yeah, that makes sense, where it's a case of just do it. Like I don't think there needs to be a lot of process around changing maintainers beyond team agrees on, yes, that makes sense. That's at least how we do in Prometheus, and in other things, and it works quite well. Like no formal votes or anything, just consensus and go for it.
Anything more on that, or are we good? Okay. So the first thing I would like to talk about today is the possibility of hosting a virtual meetup. So obviously, physical meetups aren't really a good idea right now, aside from us being all over the world. So I thought something small, maybe 2 or 3 days, or spread out over a week with a couple hours a day. I don't really have much for an agenda for that yet. I just wanted to throw the idea out there and see what people thought.
So funnily enough, we're also discussing an internal one within Grafana Labs. So now the one that we're suggesting now, I guess, would be pretty much the same with more people could, in theory, join, but in practice, I think the only person that would probably join would be Sean.
Well, So I think what we're talking about internally is more of strictly developers, right? And I think what I had in mind is also operations. So maybe some kind of workshop type things, more on how to use it, what not to do, things like that. Stuff, all the knowledge that we already have from operating it for a long time, and then sharing that with other people who might want to know. So less about the development, more about the operation, I guess.
So who will be in that meeting? Because if we share knowledge that we already have with ourselves, like where do we do that?
So we, yeah, we would need to plan this for like 2 or 3 months out because we would need to get attendance. And if, so I don't really know. Yeah, I'm not really sure on that yet. However, the worst case scenario is we come away from it with some nice videos or interactions or instructions that we can just post somewhere that other people can look at later.
As far as supporting people goes, I think Slack and GitHub work pretty well. I think if anyone has issues, it's very low barrier for them to post a message either in Slack or in GitHub explaining their problem at whatever time is convenient for them, and then we'll usually get to it. So I actually think they might be better off using that. It might make sense for us to create better content, because that's basically what you're saying now, I think. Create better content, whether it's tutorials or sessions.
Well, yes, create better content, but in a more interactive way. So, I mean, we can look over all of the issues that we've seen and all of the issues that we know about and the typical problems that people struggle with when they're operating it, or things that are maybe not very clear. We can do that, and we can create content. But I think I guess my goal is to have something a little bit more interactive. Because there may be issues we don't know about because people just solve them on their own and then they're never hear about them. Okay, well, it doesn't sound like there's much interest in this anyway. So why don't I draw something up? Why don't I draft something and then maybe pass it around and see what we think.
Yeah, I wasn't quiet because it's a terrible idea. I was just quiet because I was thinking what kind of content could we do or what kind of sessions, like what might make sense. I was just kind of thinking about that a little bit.
Okay.
Like, Metrictank obviously is quite hard to run.
Yes.
There's a lot of flags. Yeah. A lot of things that are not obvious, I think. Once you get it running, it works well, but we could do a better job at explaining it, I guess.
Yeah, I guess the question is, does it warrant a meetup? And aside from that kind of content, what else would we have? Would we have developer topics? I don't really know.
Yeah, I'm personally kind of more interested in the development side of things, like especially around writing Graphite Functions. The whole EXPR library. I think it's kind of interesting to do maybe a little bit more in depth there. I think perhaps Sean or people on his team might be more interested in that as well.
Sean, do you think anyone on your team would be interested in something like this?
I think probably some people might be. We have some knowledge pretty well spread, but I think it's mostly just a small handful of people that really know how we're dealing with Metrictank, and I think it's just me that knows pretty much everything about what we're doing with Metrictank. But I think there are a lot of areas where, especially with configuration that you might want to say, like, here's the things you should think about before you bring this thing up to scale, because it might be hard to change later or undo a mistake that you've made. And if we can identify some of those should absolutely be documentation. As far as a meetup goes, unless we think that we have a good set of these things to discuss, or that it would aid in discovery of more things to document. I'm not sure about a meetup. I mean, I'd attend and I'd be willing to talk.
Okay, now that's I guess we're all on about the same page right now, in that if the content makes sense or the theme makes sense, then yeah, we should maybe do it. So I guess back to, we'll need to write something up, jot down some ideas, and kind of just go from there, I guess. Okay. Yeah, I'll plan on doing that sometime in the next month or two. So let's move on to graphite functions. That's been something I've been working on. I haven't made very much progress, but I did get some, or aggregate with wildcards. So some multiply, and I don't remember the other one off the top of my head, average. So that's just waiting for review. That should be in pretty soon. I'm going down a list of our most commonly proxied graphite functions internally, and kind of moving on that list. So next, well, okay, let's go back to graphite functions for just a minute. So I guess the ultimate goal is still to not have to proxy to Graphite Web and just completely remove that dependency from the stack. I don't know how long that will take. I think at last count there were like 100, but some of those are like 5 at a time, right? Like moving window or like aggregate with wildcards. It's the main function, as well as all of the whatever aggregations or consolidation it can use, depending on which function it is.
I just like to quickly mention, we have a working moving window and time shift implementation. And the moving window obviously does moving max, moving average, all the others. There's a PR that I have in that all of these things are dependent on. And so we haven't upstreamed it yet, but it's there and we're ready to give it.
That's 1739. Let me find it. 1 second. Support multiple targets that act on different time windows.
Yeah, that one.
Okay.
So you guys are running that in production, Sean? 1739.
Yeah, we've been running it for months now. I think we actually deployed it before I put in the PR.
So that's the last topic on the agenda, actually. Specifically that. So as far as graphite functions, well, that's good. So that'll be done. The ones after that I was going to do are probably reduce series and map. And then what's the other one? Identity. And then there's some obscure ones that we're using for some reason. I don't really know where. I don't know where those queries are coming from.
If only there was a way to log which Grafana dashboards and panels the query came from. I'm not sure if I'm kidding, because we do have that feature somewhere. We have it in the Python Graphite, I think. Do we have it in?
Yeah, in the Python Graphite it exists, which should be enough, right?
Yeah, that's all you need.
For
They're
this
proxy,
use case.
because we don't have them implemented.
Also, shout out to Loki. Loki's awesome to find interesting ones.
Yeah, most of them are pretty normal, but then there are a couple really strange functions that are being used, and I don't recognize them from any of our dashboards.
Like whole pointers or something?
Yep, that one. And then there's some other. Let's take a look. I have it up right now. Offset to 0, I guess, is kind of normal. N percentile, interpolate, apply by node, linear regression, limit, keep last value, the aggregate line, constant line, time shift, time.
Apply by node. Is that like group by node?
Don't know. Sounds
Oh,
similar.
I see. Okay, it's different. Yeah. Looks like a fun one to implement. So it's kind of like group by node. You specify a metric expression, and then you define like a template, it looks like, that will then be interpolated. So you define a template that says like divide series, for example, and then you put some percentage signs, and then those percentage signs will be filled in based on the node number you specified. It seems pretty interesting.
Yeah, that sounds like not a lot of fun to implement.
Yeah, the interesting thing with that is like it seems like it generates a query after it fetches results. Yeah. So you define a template, and then that template defines basically a new query. So as your function apply by node is processing, fills in the template, and then it will execute that query, which is the output of the template. So that's a very strange one. I'm not sure if that doesn't map well to our system, because obviously we have, yeah, we look at the query, we parse it, we validate it, then we execute it. We don't really have a mechanism to just generate a new query on the fly.
Maybe we can run it back through.
Yeah.
Get the first results and run it through. It's still the same context, right?
Yeah, it might just work to basically create a new plan inside of that function. We can look more deep into it offline.
Yeah. Anyway, that's still a push. Getting all of those done, or getting the most popular ones done. So I'm working off of our list, but if you have a list, I'd be more than happy to look at that too, Sean, just to get some insights onto what other people are doing.
Yeah, we do have a list. It's pretty much like the slim pickings stuff now after the last round we went through. I think constant line is the one that's the big one, and that's just because it's implemented, but it's disabled because there was some weirdness with allowing a zero requests or a zero series request to go through, because constant line doesn't actually require input series. It just returns a value. And there's
that's the one that we had an incident with, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's implemented. It's just not enabled because it required disabling the short circuit on zero series.
Yeah, we're gonna need to look into what's going wrong there. That was really strange. We had to disable that function, but obviously it's not fun. We want to enable it again, but we have to figure out. That was really strange. And Sean, your PR 1739. Sorry for not looking at it for a while. It's a complicated one, right? But we'll try our best.
We can just discuss that now. It was going to be the last one anyway, but so I forgot about it, and then I was looking at implementing moving window, and Dieter had reminded me about it. And I went and looked at that, and the initial implementation that someone else had done for moving window that was dependent on that I think was closed. So the one thing that we were discussing earlier today actually was, do we want to allow both a duration and or a number of points to be used as the argument. So I thought I'd found a way to perform the calculations to change number of points into duration, but I forgot that at the point that we have to do that, we don't actually have any of the series names yet. So another option was to do worst case scenario and just choose the longest time period possible based on all the available retentions instead of trying to match to one, which has performance implications in that depending on the number of series, the size, time range, etc., it could fetch a lot more data than it needs to.
Yeah, I think the other issue that Dieter actually had brought up when we were discussing it was that it's dependent on the previous functions that run as well. So if someone puts a summarize in front of it of an hour, now 30 points is 30 hours, not whatever the raw input series interval was. So in our version, we just don't. We just say fail, or like, sorry, we can't handle this proxy to graphite if it's the points, and we only do the duration.
What do we think about just failing, not proxying, just saying stop using this, just use a duration?
I think that brings up a whole other conversation of graphite compatibility. I think I'm generally okay if we make decisions on when we're going to be graphite incompatible, especially if the idea is to move to a standalone processing system that doesn't require any proxying. But I think there's a lot of areas where we could simplify or remove things if we wanted to go that route.
Or what about changing it in graphite?
I'd break dashboards that are using the other way for now, but
yeah. No graphite maintainer is going to say, sure, let's merge a PR that suddenly breaks features that have worked fine for years.
Maybe not.
Yeah, like from a product perspective, like we at Grafana Labs, we would like to start deploying our software without requiring that people also set up graphite. And so that means that we cannot be 100% compatible. I think there has to be certain allowances here and there that some minor things are just not supported, period.
And I think that's okay. And in all the cases that we currently say, let's proxy, if they say, no, there is no way to proxy, then we just fail. And we say, we don't support this query, right? In the current deployment. And as long as it's set up in such a way that, hey, if you configure a fallback graphite, everything works just compatibly, right? And we call that like the fully compatible deployment. And if you don't deploy a fallback graphite, you'd say this is the native deployment or whatever, and you get a subset of the functions and functionality.
I like that idea.
Yeah, and like the other example is actually this morning I filed a PR that basically just adds an entry to our documentation describing the differences with graphite. We just add an entry saying PCRE style regular expressions are not supported, because they're not. And instead of trying to implement them, let's just document that we don't support that anymore. And same thing with this. I think as long as we just document it and we're very transparent about it, I think it's fine to have some allowances, not support them.
Okay. Well, that sounds good to me. So the moving window implementation you're using is not the one that had a PR opened for it previously that was closed, or is it that one?
It is that one. Yeah, that was a coworker, Vinit. He accidentally put it in with a bunch of the commits that it depended on from 1739. And I was like, I think you should just withdraw that for now, and we'll wait until 1739 is merged, and then we'll put in the PRs.
Okay, well then I'll stop working on moving window and do that instead.
So okay. That's actually very clever, Sean. So that's kind of like the carrot trick. You give us this PR, or the idea that we're going to get our next PR, but we're only going to get the next PR if we merge the first one.
Because you get the first one's free.
Yeah.
It's actually you bring in a new person like a pyramid scheme. You need to think.
Yeah, so Robert, I think you and I should bite the bullet and like give that review another close look. It's a complicated one, and it like the complexity spreads well beyond the code that has changed, and like you need to look at all the other related code. But we have to work through that, and hopefully we can just merge it.
I remember looking through it a couple weeks ago, and those were my exact thoughts. And then I think you were gone, or I was gone, and I was waiting for you to come back. And then I think I took vacation, and then you took vacation. So now here we are. But I agree. I'll do that. I'll start doing that tomorrow. I'll start looking at it or today or tomorrow again. So along with that PR is the one that allows you to use different time windows per request, was it? Or
So technically it's already supported to use different time windows in each like internal request. Obviously at the top level request you can't, but each context, each request has the .from and .to independent from each other. And it mostly works. I think this is really just to, if we need to, I think it was if we needed to reduce the interval because we went over a line, you know, say we had 30-day retention for the raw data and then 90-day for 5-minute data, right? That we wouldn't do it for everything because, you know, some data might not be crossing that 30-day line.
Okay, so this is the ability to return different resolution data.
Sorry, I'm still a little bit confused. This is not the ability to return different resolution.
Right, from within a given. From within a given.
Within the singles. So there's this PN group optimization, right, where everything is sort of normalized within a PN group already. Then there's this other set of things called singles that are things that don't belong to a PN group explicitly. And previously, all of the singles were reduced together, basically in step. This is to split that up into splitting that. Well, part of the change is to split the singles into being reduced independently from each other.
When you say reduce, do you mean with the context of max points per request? Like if that threshold is breached, that we reduce the accuracy of the data that we're fetching? Or are you talking about a different kind of reduction?
Yeah, I think basically that.
Okay. So you're saying you're changing the reduction to be in groups per what? Per target? No.
I think the groups are basically the same. It's all based on the request. I mean, I'd have to look at it again, I think, but the big thing that I remember is that the singles needed to be planned independently based on their time ranges, not based on some overall from to time range that was that of the request.
Right, so it's basically the changes, instead of doing plan lowest res for MDP singles, it's for just once, it's going over all the requests and doing it for each one independently.
Basically, it's just bringing in the concept that there is another set of from and tos that are not the high level ones. So I think previously there was like a from to that was passed in as an argument, and then it was used everywhere. And I think this change is really just using the from and to for each grouping separately. So if you have a PN group that has like some number of series or requests in it, that were series with requests, we basically, I think we find the oldest from and the newest to, and then we use that to plan what archive we want to grab. And then for the singles, it's similar, except now we treat each single independently, and we just use the from to for that particular single series.
It's more precise planning as it applies to whatever the highest precision we can get is.
So, yeah, I need to look at the code. I think it's running clear in my head if I just look at the code.
The code is actually pretty clear.
My main concern would be with max points per request soft, when we start reducing series, implementing that, it means we or I had to come up with some heuristics to try to do this in the same way, but still present something to the user that seems reasonable. And I think one of the guidelines that I thought made sense is that if you have a bunch of series that are all similar, like they have the same name, like basically the same storage schema rule, like they might all be like server dot whatever or CPU usage. All those will look the same, they have the same interval. And if we breach the soft requests, sorry, the max point per request soft, I wouldn't want to necessarily reduce some of them to be more coarse grained and then other ones to be more high resolution, because that would kind of look weird on a chart.
Yeah, I do recall that. I think initially when I had implemented it, I did them all separately and it looked weird. I think now I do it, I think I went back to the way it was going and I do it per archive ID.
Okay.
I don't remember, whatever granularity we have in there, I do it. There is a grouping within this. The singles are still grouped together by something, by some key that I'm not entirely remembering, but I still do all of them together. But now, because I changed the function call, I do them one at a time for their independent from and twos, I think. Probably, I forget.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yes,
this code is
archive.
This code is interesting, complicated, and something I sometimes wonder, could we simplify it, especially the PN group stuff? I think I want to keep the PN groups because I'm pretty sure they result in speedups, but they certainly don't simplify the code. Same for max points per request soft. They also don't simplify the code at all.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that when we had discussed sending the like raw data back, the chunks, especially then you definitely want to know ahead of time which ones to grab. Unless maybe grabbing the chunks makes it so cheap that we don't have to worry about it, but I sort of doubt that.
Yeah. Like basically, I'm just looking for ways that we could simplify this code, like cutting out something. I'm not sure what. Like the MDP optimizations, those are probably never going to happen. We can probably just cut that out.
Yeah, I feel like those are really difficult to get to, and I don't know that they'd be worth it anyway.
Yeah, so for those of you who are like completely lost in this entire conversation, I think the one thing that we're talking about now is there's some optimizations that I thought of but didn't fully implement, but implemented some of the basics for and then basically marked it as experimental and disabled by default. But the code is still there and there's some if-else conditions. I think we could just type that all out. That's probably not good.
Sounds fair enough. We can probably discuss that another time.
It also just becomes too much like reasoning about all these different scenarios. Like, oh, what if your query does this, but it fetches data like that? And like, oh, you have this parameter, but you're doing an aggregation here. Like, you can go back through all these tickets of prior conversations. There's like all these edge cases. I don't want to spend the mental energy anymore on this. I want to cut it out.
Yeah. Anyway, so that hopefully that PR will be getting reviewed soon.
Excellent.
Yeah. Okay, so the other thing I had on here was documentation. But I kind of like what we brought up about graphite compatibility. That's an interesting idea. I mean, there's already a list of functions that are stable, right? So if people know they're not going to use anything that's not stable, I guess they don't really have to proxy to Graphite. Are we set up for that already? I don't remember. Do we have a mode that doesn't proxy? Aside from specifying it in the query itself?
I'm not sure. I don't think we currently have an option that says never proxy anything. If that's your question, I'm not sure if I understood it correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could probably hack it in there by putting an incorrect, like a bogus Graphite address, but I think you'll get the wrong responses for HTTP requests, which is obviously not going to be great. But functionally, it would be about equivalent.
Yeah, or this sounds like a 5-line patch. You can also probably just patch it if you want that feature. So why are you asking, Robert? What's the context?
Well, it sounds like an interesting idea. I don't know. I guess I just liked it, and that we maybe don't necessarily have to be 100% compatible for the because obviously our parsing and planning and processing system is set up quite differently. So some of these functions are going to be very tricky to implement. That's not to say we can't do it. It's just some of the work involved might not be worth it for some of the more obscure ones. Now, obviously, I guess if it doesn't really matter if you have a no proxy mode, because if you're not using any of the functions, they won't be proxied anyway. But it would be nice to not even have to deploy it, right? I think that's the other idea, the resources. Like that you just don't have to deploy Graphite at all.
I think we may also want to have a look at Carbon API, which is another Go-based project that implements a lot of the Graphite library in Go. They may have taken a more Graphite-like approach to how they process queries. Maybe, I'm not sure, but perhaps the way that they instantiate or like execute queries might lead itself more to doing these kind of weird things that we can't support. So maybe we should have a closer look at that library.
Are you saying and then rewrite what we're doing, like rewrite the whole pipeline?
Well, if that library basically supports all of the Graphite functions and it looks like a high-quality library, then maybe we could cut out our own expression library, just use theirs. We would have to make some sacrifices, like for example, we can't use max points per request, soft and hard. That's a feature that we came up with that library probably doesn't have. And there might be a couple things like that. I'm just saying it might be interesting to have a look at that. We might be able to save ourselves quite some work.
Yeah, or if that's cheaper and faster to run than Graphite Web, maybe using that instead of Graphite Web. I don't really know much about it, but that's another option. Because really, so the only thing that really gets us is when large queries or large time ranges or lots and lots of series are queried and it has to proxy to Graphite Web. That's when you see an actual performance hit. For most cases, it doesn't even matter. Like if you don't have a lot of data and you're running some small function, it'll still return very, very fast. It's not really noticeable.
That's a really interesting idea. Instead of proxying to Graphite, proxy to Carbon API. If Carbon API can implement the full Graphite stuff.
I don't know the status of that project, if they have all of the functions implemented or not. But that sounds like it could be an option. I imagine it wouldn't really be much of a change, if any, to Metrictank itself, right? Because we're just proxying the request out and getting a response back. It's the same thing. It's a black box, so it should theoretically function the same way, unless they have weird return results.
If it supports the same like basic storage finder or whatever called like functions, because that's basically, we proxy the request to Graphite, then Graphite is configured to use Metrictank as a storage endpoint, so it reaches back out to Metrictank for the raw data. So as long as Carbon API did something similar, and we'd have to make sure it was kept up to date and with Graphite.
Actually, Carbon API recently gained support for Metrictank as a backend.
Shouldn't. It's surprising none of us knew that.
That sounds interesting. I'm gonna write that down here. So that sounds like a neat idea. I kind of like that. I mean, they're pretty performant, right, compared to Python?
I feel like it would be hard not to be.
Yeah, I was thinking the same.
Bad news. I'm just looking at their list of at their compatibility list. They actually still have a pretty decent amount of functions that are not implemented.
That are not implemented?
Yeah,
of course.
Well, back to your idea. If that library proves to be more stable, just as fast, compatible, whatever, if it's easier to implement the functions there because of how they have it set up, then that's also an option. Use that as the library, and then just implement the functions there instead of in Metrictank. I don't know. I'm just throwing things out here.
They also have an interesting set of original functions that are not Graphite functions. They're like Carbon API only functions. That's kind of an interesting concept. Also, with respect to running a subset of functions, I believe Grafana actually reaches out for like with the /functions endpoint to get the supported functions. And right now, Metrictank just proxies that to Graphite. But theoretically, in this alternative setup, Metrictank could just return the supported functions. That way, when using the query editor builder style, it would just show up with the ones that are supported anyway, and probably no one would ever use, unless they find them in the docs over at Graphite, probably most people wouldn't even use the other stuff.
Yeah.
Or we expand on the functions to like add comments or like discouraged versus encouraged functions.
So I remember at one point we toyed around with allowing custom functions. Obviously someone can submit a pull request, right? But I don't think, we don't have any custom functions that aren't from Graphite, do we?
Right. All the functions that we have are also.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess because the idea is once you have once you have custom functions implemented that no one else does, and you start using them, then you're kind of locked into that, or you have to convince whoever you want to switch to implement them. Like, it becomes a whole big mess. And it's probably why we don't do that. Just stick with the standards. I guess, is there anything that you can't do with the current set of Graphite functions? Is there anything that people constantly complain about? Like, hey, I can't do this because no combination of functions in the world will do this for me.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the Carbon API functions that they implemented, a lot of it is more like statistical stuff, like Kolmogorov Smirnov tests, exponentially weighted moving average, a lot of stuff like that.
I'm having a little trouble hearing it.
Cookie. Like a lot of the functions, the custom functions in Carbon API tend to be very specific statistical functions for like specific analysis use cases.
Okay.
Yeah, like polyfit. I think one that I encounter a lot is when I want to do any runtime consolidation that would happen at the end up front. So like if I'm about to do a division to compute an average, right? And I want to sum I want to do like the sum over the count. I would like to consolidate those by sum ahead of time, then do the division, and then know that there's no consolidation after that. Rather than right now, I either do a summarize to make sure it's coarse enough that it won't consolidate, or I just say consolidate the division by average, and then I get an average of averages, or max, or whatever I need to display it kind of right. But if I want like a proper average, I need to make sure that I do the sum of the sum and the sum of the count before the division. So something like consolidate now, or like summarize with an automatic interval or something, you know, would be handy.
I would be open to some custom functions in general that are not in Graphite. I think it would be okay for us to do that in general. And then in particular, this one, Sean, I think it makes sense. You brought it up before and you explained it in a little bit more detail to me, and you managed to convince me that that one seemed quite sensible. So. Robert's point about locking, I'm not too worried about that. I mean, for us, it's kind of a new language, I guess.
I kind of am. I think one of the big things is like back when we used OpenTSDB, one of the big reasons we had actually kind of found Graphite and been like, this is a good interface, we think, that is, you know, customizable because, you know, you could set your own storage endpoints. And we actually built a Graphite, like a little crappy, really inefficient Graphite shim in front of OpenTSDB. And then we were like, okay, so from now on, if we ever want to switch things, you know, we have this interface and nothing needs to break if we switch. Now, that's probably not true because it's such a wide set of functions that are independently implemented that there might be tiny little things that are different. And we even we get some breakage when we implement some new native function in Metrictank that causes a function that previously proxied to go to Metrictank, and we find there's some slight difference. But the idea being, if we ever wanted to switch databases again, we would always have the option of a Graphite interface in front of it without having to do a horrible, terrible migration of everything to a new language. So yeah, lock-in is kind of bad, but I think for things like this, putting them in Metrictank and then you know, putting in a request or a PR to Graphite to say, here, this is in Metrictank and it's great. And people love it. Add it.
Yeah, there's that path also.
Yeah, but realistically, and when I say we at Grafana Labs, we don't really have the resources anymore to like contribute both to our Go, you know, the functions in Go, and also replicate the same ones in Python for Graphite.
Yeah, we also just we never update Graphite at Bloomberg, so like we're still running 1.1.1, I think. So
I was never a Python developer. Otherwise, I would probably just do that in my spare time, but I don't really like Python. I remember learning it like many years ago and then saying, yeah, I don't like this. That's back when I was doing C though, so in my defense, any kind of interpreted or scripted anything, I was just like, nope. Florian understands.
Yeah, you said the same thing about Go like 2 weeks ago. So I don't know.
That's okay. Okay, well, that's all very interesting. So, yeah, I guess we can look at custom functions, see what we think. I am a little bit concerned about lock-in. I guess if there's like some kind of warning on it that says, hey, if you're going to use this function, just know it's not implemented anywhere else. So, you know, do this at your own risk.
Yeah, definitely don't mix it with a function that would cause proxying, because that's just going to break everything.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. Suddenly a function that always works, now you wrap that function with some other function that also just works. And now the result of those two doesn't work out.
We could have like a never proxy flag or something.
Yeah, but then we wouldn't be able to handle a query like that.
Yep. Basically. So that goes back to implementing all the functions. Then we don't have to worry about it. Yeah, I guess that's a good point also. That's kind of key, huh? We have to have everything implemented that someone could possibly use in conjunction with a custom one, or just fail it. Okay, and we spent quite a bit of time on that. So I have documentation on the agenda, and I don't remember what I wanted to talk about. I had something in mind. It eludes me now. Probably have a something open with it. Nope, I don't know.
I'm going to guess that you probably wanted to improve the documentation.
That what?
You probably wanted to improve the documentation. Does that help jog your memory?
Nah. Not at all. That's okay. Okay. That's I think that's about all I have for today. So quick recap and some action items. We're maybe open to a virtual meetup depending on the content, timeline, etc., like how beneficial it would be to everyone. PR 1739 will be reviewed hopefully very soon, and then we can get moving window and all the other moving functions in. And we'll probably just leave it incompatible and not allow data points for now. And other things to look into, Carbon API instead of Graphite Web maybe, for proxying or some things, or at least to see how they're implementing the parsing and processing of requests. And yeah, and then maybe custom functions. Okay, I think that's about it. Does anyone else have anything before I close this?
Oh yeah, we actually, so a few months ago, I put in a PR that sort of fixed cleaning of plans, which puts all of the series back into the slice pool. We actually found a case where sometimes we're getting duplicate slices back, and it's causing sort of corruption of the response. So like I disabled it. I disabled the plan.clean, and I left all the other point slice pool usage around, and we haven't seen it since. So I don't know if it fixed it entirely or if it just reduced the likelihood of it happening.
Are you talking about where you changed it to use a pointer instead of?
Yeah, so before that, it was never actually returning anything to the slice pool. But after using a pointer, it does, and we started seeing this corruption. So I disabled it again, sort of to go back the way it was. But I was wondering if anyone else had seen anything like this and knew what was causing it.
Maro, weren't we working on a problem that we thought was related to exactly this a couple weeks ago?
Possible. I don't remember the details anymore. I think our suspicion at the time, was that we saw data points which are supposed to belong to series 1 were actually in series 2. Like the data points got mixed up between the series. That was the symptoms that we believed to see.
Yeah, and then I started looking very closely at plan clean. Because as I was moving through it, I was like, okay, I think the only changes to the points, I thought it might be the point slice pool or something similar. And the only changes I saw were exactly what you were just talking about. So I don't know that it's the same issue if you were seeing multiple or double. What we were seeing was they were mixed up, but that still leads me to believe it's a corruption somehow in either how the point slice pool is getting used or cleaned, right? So one of those two things, like it's not cleaning and reassigning it, or it's doing something like that.
Yeah, and it's something that was happening very infrequently as far as we could tell.
Yep, same.
But yeah, it was for us, what we were seeing is, we'd make a request that had, let's say 500 series come back, and there would be like 2 or 3 that had the same values. And then if you made the request again, one of them would have those same values because they were the correct values, but the other 2 that had those same values had their actual values again. And it was, we couldn't, like, we actually took a request that was bad and we made it like 8,000 times, and and we could not make it happen again. And
yeah, we also tried to reproduce it. Like actually, after we saw this issue, at first we thought that maybe the chunk cache is corrupt, right? So I believe at the time we restarted the Metrictank cluster, and then we were not able to reproduce it anymore. But I remember that before the restart, what we were doing was we basically submitted one query, which was simply fetching like 10,000 metrics, and I think we applied like keep last value or no function at all.
Yeah.
And we also saw that points of one metric were in another metric. Like, yeah.
If I recall correctly, because I reproduced that issue, right? I think I could only reproduce it with keep last value around it.
Oh, you did a bunch of testing on that. You ran scripts for like hours.
Yeah. I had like a whole toolkit.
I thought could you reproduce it? Because we never figured it out, did we? Didn't we just say, okay, maybe it would up chunk cache?
So the issue that we're talking about, I tested a variety of Git revisions from master, and I could tell that at some point the issue was introduced, and then also at another point the issue disappeared. So I know for a fact it was introduced in a certain commit and disappeared in another commit. I did a lot of experiments, and it was very consistent. And no one on our team figured out why it was introduced in that commit and why it was solved in that other commit and what the issue was. But once we realized that it was no longer in master, we just kind of moved on.
Well, I'm still getting it, and I'm pretty up to date with master, so I'm not sure it's fixed. Or maybe it's just a different thing.
It sounds like a slightly different issue. I mean, it sounds like similar, but slightly different. So this reminds me of something else that I have been thinking about a little bit, which is, and there was a ticket about this too. Some of you may have seen this ticket, but I've been wanting to add some kind of flags to every point slice, so that would basically mark whether it's available to be used, meaning it's not in the pool, or whether it's in the pool and so it cannot be used. I mean, once it's in the pool, it cannot be used, but then once you retrieve it, it can be used. So with the idea of detecting, if you fetch a point slice pool out of the pool, a point slice out of the pool, but somebody else is already using it, or you're adding the same one twice to the pool, like it would detect all these kinds of cases. But after some thinking, no, I don't think the pool really cares. You can add the same pointer in it many times, and it will probably return it many times, and then you accidentally use the same slice several times.
Yeah, and you also can't do like external tracking because the pool can just arbitrarily clean itself. So you have to do something in the data itself, like Peter's describing, I think.
Yeah, but then I couldn't find a way to do this in a nice way.
Yeah, it would be a very big. Everything would change.
Type. Yeah, it would be a custom type, and then everything else needs to be aware of this custom type. And I decided not to do it.
No, not necessarily, because you can have a struct. It's just kind of like what we did in the object store, right? So you have a struct, and you know that the first X bytes are the flag, and then anything after that, you just cast it to the. You just create a slice header and then fill that in for the pointer, and you're done. Except for the length, and then there's other stuff to track, but it's not that difficult.
It just means everything would have to be created from the same place, of the same type. If someone actually tried to return a slice that was just a slice to the pool, there's nothing before it.
That wouldn't work.
I mean, should be easy enough to verify.
If they just want to return a slice. So no, I guess I was
No. I meant that all places that were returning slices were returning slices that got them from the same place.
Oh, yeah. There's only a couple places where the point slice pool is actually manipulated, like where things are taken out of or put back into it. It's not like there's a lot of different places. So I don't actually think this would be that hard to just switch it all to a custom type that has a flag. Or better yet, just, like a flag and then just do atomics on it or something.
But it's not just only whenever adding and removing to the pool. It's at various points in the processing pipeline. Like you might have a query where you have some series data, and then that series data gets fed into a division, right? You combine two series into one. You probably reuse one of them for your output, whereas the other one can then be returned. And then later you do consolidation, but maybe you have to do normalization. Like there's all these steps during the processing where we should be checking whether it's safe what we're doing. And
okay.
But I think at each point, if you check when you get it, that when you get it out of the pool, that it's safe to use, and if you check when it's put back in, that it wasn't already marked as bad, then you should be able to tell. I mean, yeah, there might be some time in the middle where something had referred to it and then stopped needing it, and it wasn't put back until later. But I think that it still leaves us in a better state than we are now, which is totally unawares.
But when you want to add something back into the pool, how are you going to do that check? Unless you have a custom type.
And that's what?
You need a custom type.
Yeah.
Yeah, you still need a custom type.
But what's the problem with that is what I'm getting at.
Well, you need to just pass it through everywhere, through like the entire code base, and you need to be aware of a different type.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, when you're saying entire code base, like the point slice stuff where that gets passed around is not that much. Right?
Where the point slice gets passed around? Well, it's in a lot of places. It's in all the processing functions, it's in all the normalization, consolidation, divide series, all that stuff. Aggregators. It's doable. It just would be a big patch.
I don't know. It would be nice to be able to track point slices around, though, as they get moved.
Well, actually, on that note, should we even be using the standard sync.pool? Maybe we should have our own mechanism, one that doesn't clear every garbage collection. And we can make it better.
One that what? Oh yeah, there's.
I think that the newest synced up pool, I mean, in 1.13, 1.14, doesn't necessarily clear on every garbage collection. It uses a victim cache, so it actually knows how much you used in the last one and just cleans up the stuff you didn't use, which is actually pretty effective, I think, versus something like a buffered channel. But yeah, with something like a buffered channel, we would at least know exactly what was in the. We'd have full control over when it was cleared, which is nice.
Yeah, but it would probably also perform worse because the Go runtime stuff that has like per thread optimization and stuff.
Yeah. There's a lot of optimizations for returning a single element from a thread and not actually pooling it if it doesn't need to. So you'd lose all of that. That being said, I wonder what the if the actual time cost of pool is a very small portion of what we're doing versus the allocation anyway. Maybe it's not that big a deal if it gets a little bit slower, but I don't know. We'd have to run some numbers.
Yeah.
I would imagine someone's already come up with a solution for exactly this. We could take a look around too. We can't be the first people who have said, "Oh, this isn't really quite what I want." That's interesting.
What would also be nice is if we could statically analyze our code and find places where we are returning the same slice twice, instead of having to do that one time.
Yeah, my thought for like possibly it'll only catch it if it's actually something that's happening in the clean call, but when we do call plan.clean or the data map stuff, when we put everything in, do that. I added a function there that basically ensures that all the stuff in the data map is distinct from each other using just the slice boundaries. We could just we add that to the clean call and basically say, don't put it back in if it's in this same data map. But that would only fix it if it was two values in the same data map, not if it was two values floating around between alternative data maps.
Yeah, so if slices were used across two different requests, two different queries, then it wouldn't detect it. But actually, that's a good idea. The problem seems like it might be fairly commonly happen within the same request. So your suggestion?
Yeah, I mean, that's when we notice it, right? Otherwise, it just looks like arbitrary wrong data coming back.
Well, I definitely think the takeaway from that is we need to take another hard look at what we're doing in general with the sync pool and point slices and everything else, and how we're cleaning them and retrieving them. And then maybe come up with what makes the most sense. I guess we could open an issue for ideas or something if there's not one already open.
If you can find a bug by just reading the code, then I'm gonna pay you. I'm gonna buy you a bottle.
No, I couldn't. We already tried that experiment.
Right.
Yeah, we already did that. That's why we ended up here.
Yeah, I couldn't find this bug by just looking through the code. I was like, it's too many places. I can't I can't track it all.
I'm normally pretty good at that, but yeah, this one threw me off. I don't know. I mean, I could spend time and actually, once I could consistently reproduce it, then you can trace it through. But I think
that was my problem. I couldn't reproduce it.
Yeah, it's so inconsistent that it's just too difficult.
Actually, from the outside in, just getting the ticket, I was like, duplicate data sometimes. I was like, Jesus, that could be anything. And I just like, I ended up just disabling plan.clean because I was like, that's the only thing I can think of that's easy to change and won't break everything. And that ended up silencing it. So I'm just assuming that was the problem, but I haven't actually proven it.
No, again though, that's after the pointer changes, right? So you just stopped running plan clean, but you're still using pointers. Okay, because I wonder if we reverted it to not using. Well, I guess if we reverted it, it wouldn't be calling it anyway. So same thing.
What was the performance impact, Sean, of disabling the plan clean?
It actually wasn't that bad. It was like maybe, I think it's just the query nodes, and it was like, I'm trying to remember, I think it was like 10% more CPU, 10% higher, I mean, and like the actual allocation rate was about 10% higher as well. It wasn't crazy different, but it was like noticeable. I saw it.
And then the memory usage, did the memory usage change?
Memory usage didn't really change at all. Yeah. I mean, from our query nodes don't really have that high memory usage anyway. They're pretty much, they have a pretty high allocation rate, but they clean up quickly.
Okay. Anything else on this? We're a little bit over. I mean, I don't have anything going on, but I don't want to hold anyone up.
So I'm just wondering, does it make sense to file this PR that whenever you call plan.clean, it checks in the data map to find any overlaps? Do we want to take that hit? Is that something that we should do?
I mean, I was planning on doing it, at least not necessarily to master, but just as a rollout, because I figured, how costly could it really be? Most of our responses aren't that large in terms of number of series, and even if it's 10,000, it's basically a linear check, although you have to build a set. But
yeah, I think I would be open to this change, especially if there's a flag to control it. Then we could have it in output. And if it finds an overlap, then it can tell you exactly what query it was, the names of the series, that have the issue. Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Then, if no one has anything else, does anyone?
Good.
I have one point of order. Should we try Meet instead of Zoom for the next call?
Please.
Yes. Please, yes.
Yeah, Zoom is blocked on my VPN, so I have to actually close the Bloomberg VPN before I can use it. But Meet we're allowed to use.
Okay, so I'll set it up for the next call then. Perfect.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's a great idea. Let's switch, and I'll have to open a PR to change the docs to the Meet link once we have it. Awesome. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining as usual, and this video will be posted, I don't know, in the next couple of days or something.
I have to be in an hour or 3 probably, so tomorrow at the latest.
Okay, great. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your morning, day, or evening.
Have a good one.
Thank you, Robert.
All right.
Thanks,
Sure.
Robert.
Bye,
Thanks, Richie.
Thank you.